So thank you to all of our panelists. We have Igor, Vivian, Pat, and Ellen, who've known Claire for many, many years. And we will be following the order of the program. We thank all of our panelists and Claire's family, particularly her sisters, Carol and Kiki. We feel like we know you all very well. So in any event, let's begin. And so Igor, please take it away.
Great, thank you very much, Maria. First of all, I would like to apologize in advance if I break down, because this truly is very personal and it is very unfortunate and sad that we have to gather here today under these circumstances in this panel. I was caught by surprise a couple of weeks ago, well, almost 2 months ago, when I heard the news, when I saw the post on Facebook, and I really I couldn't keep my composure when I learned, because it was utterly unexpected. So thank you for including me in this panel. It means a great deal to me, and I'll try to keep it short so that everyone has a chance to express their thoughts on Claire. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Igor Jurilj, and I'm calling from Zagreb, Croatia. And I'm honored to have been invited to honor Claire Culleton here today. Claire, my mentor and my close friend. As you can tell, there is this nervousness and the feeling, which comes from the feeling of inadequacy, undoubtedly swelling when you have to pick up words to illustrate how the heart weeps and thoughts compete in terms of what you can say about Claire to honor her properly. In the race of impressions and memories, I will resort to our first encounter in 2010 in Trieste. After opening of the James Joyce Summer School, Claire and I met in the informal part of the first day and immediately began what would become a decade of tireless banter and a decade of friendship. I was thrilled by the beam that would serve as a break to a series of jokes and humorous experiences with working on Joyce. As everyone knows, Claire was a joker, a prankster, and it was immediately clear that choosing the Dubliner seminar that year at the University of Trieste was the right choice for this 23-year-old back then, 23-year-old student, mortified by the titans and behemoths of the Joyceful universe. Claire's simplicity, however, simplicity of conduct, reassured me of what I was venturing in, and soon it would show to be a constructive journey. So dozens of pages of noted words that are here next to me in this very moment now serve not only as a map on my Joycean journey, especially when it comes to interpreting Dubliners and when it comes to utilizing Dubliners in the Bloomsday project, but also it serves as the first chapter of the scrapbook that would continue to be filled with inspiration and friendship. Every seminar, every day would be followed by a glass of Italian white wine, I have to say, which became our leitmotif that week. And it was truly, genuinely one of the most beautiful weeks of my life, not only because of Claire, but also because of the beautiful people that I've met, and I've stayed in touch ever since. Now, I'm not implying any gray-bound foundation to our friendship. Soon after the Trieste Summer School, now knowing my calling was found, Claire extended John McCourt's invitation for the Joyce Birthday Conference in Rome the following year in 2011. And that would be my first time presenting, and my only requirement was to have Claire alongside as my rock and support in my own virgin reading of Ulysses. That night after the conference, after the talk, we were in the same panel that was chaired by John. The idea of Bloomsday Croatia was actually conceived and presented to Claire and John McCourt, and it was them who encouraged the young student to bring Joyce back to Croatia, where he had lived in 1904. The first Bloomsday saw the light of June that same year in Zagreb, and encouraged by the debut edition, but also by Claire from across the Atlantic, we decided to take Joyce back to Pula in 2012. So as you may have deduced, Claire had a big share in that, and as she was teaching the Dubliner seminar right at the former Berlitz School in the Roman Square in Pula in 2012. the same square and school the 23-year-old Jimmy Joyce worked at. So as the Bloomsday Creation Project grew bigger, we were thrilled to finally obtain the means to invite scholars from abroad, and in 2015, Claire rejoined and rejoiced Bloomsday. With a first perspective on Dubliners, Claire was the star of our academic part of the festival. She truly thrilled creation English teachers and professors with her rethinking of Dubliners, or as she would put it herself, she started to consider the thin end of the wedge. That seminar gave a new optimistic reading of the short story collection to everyone's delight. And that would soon become a co-author book with Ellen Scheible in 2017. And in the following years, Claire and myself would find new avenues for our friendship that would extend the Joyce universe, primarily in the domain of visual arts. We would exchange perspectives on painting as our ways to meditate in the free time. And in her traditional Sunday painting sessions, she would oftentimes paint the riverside of my town, Karlovac, or concealed motifs from Pula that she had taken pictures of, while serving snacks from vessels to her guests, to her friends, fellow painters, from vessels that my mother gifted her during her visits to our summer house in Pula. So these little personal vignettes might steer away from the focus of this conference, but the person I'm honoring here today came into my life as a Joycean, but truly eventually evolved into an extended family member, and she left me in truly in great sadness as a genuine part of this family, the Juraj family. So to go back to painting, painting would be my safe haven while I was working and living in Turkey for 7 years. I would go back and forth to Croatia for the Bloomsday festivities and activities. And Claire would be my rock as I was dealing with a lot of things and challenges on the Syrian border and later in Istanbul. And I would open up to her and seek advice from her. So for years, we would also play birthday games. For the other one's birthday, we would explore quirky and unconventional greeting cards of different genres and forms. So we would try to find different ways to express care and affection for each other through those visual messages. And alas, this last birthday, I did not reach out with an equivalent message, only with a conventional one. And that was, of course, a message of love. Her response was a quick one, of course. Everyone knows that, Claire used to celebrate her birthday on New Year's Eve. And she responded with, "Have a great 2021, XOXO," in typical Claire Culleton manner. And those were actually the last words sent out to me. Sadly, 2021 is anything but great. As I said, the news of her demise caught me by surprise in April. And for a couple of days, I truly couldn't cope because, yeah, I truly lost a family member, a friend, a mentor, a role model in the context of reading and living James Joyce. So Claire will truly be missed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Igor. That was lovely. And our next panelist is Vivian. So please, Vivian, take it away.
Thank you, Maria. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vivian Valvano Lynch, and this is for Claire. I met Claire in 1991 at my first Miami Joyce conference at the University of Miami. I was a PhD student, as was she. However, we lived in different worlds. I, transitioning from my position as a senior associate dean in university administration and adjunct teaching of English to full-time tenure-track faculty, was wondering what in the world I was doing among internationally respected Joyce scholars and Miami graduate students, far younger than I. But those full-time doctoral students and those scholars made me feel welcome. And Claire when she learned that I, like her, was a New Yorker, was particularly helpful and supportive, and she became my first Joycean friend, a lasting friend. As years passed at the conferences in Miami and the June Joyce conferences and international symposia, I heard Claire give many wonderful, articulate papers, always with a serendipitous smattering of wit and always with an aura of consummate professionalism. She was one of the best handlers of questions and comments whom I have ever known. Her papers that tracked the progress of her projects and her scholarship fascinated me, but I will highlight just two among many. By 1994, the project whose roots lay in her dissertation research culminated in her fine monograph, Names and Naming in Joyce. Claire delved into her topic, moving from Stephen Hero through Finnegan's Wake, and John Bishop accorded the book his highest praise. Quote, almost every critic of Joyce has somewhere passingly acknowledged Joyce's fascination with names, but no one, emphasis, no one, outside of this work has yet so systematically explored it, end quote. By 2004, her years-long investigation of J. Edgar Hoover and his FBI's efforts to monitor artists whom he deemed dangerous or immoral yielded her ingeniously noiresque titled tome, Joyce and the G-Men, J. Edgar Hoover's Manipulation of Modernism. Claire, as a literary detective, investigated the primary detective and law enforcement agency of the United States. As Patrick McCarthy, who's here with us today, noted, she succeeded in assessing, quote, the chilling effect of Hoover's campaign on modern literature, end quote. It all started with her requesting Joyce's FBI file under the Freedom of Information Act. It ended with a book as much about Hoover and the clandestine surveillance of intellectuals as about Joyce. My favorite chapter title is Modern Literature and Hoover's Degenerist Anxieties. Claire's publication and presentation history continued unabated, and she also demonstrated distinctive expertise as an editor. But I want to remind everyone, or make them aware, that Claire was also a notable and valued presence when she was not the author, editor, or speaker. She was the most attentive, earnest audience member at conference sessions that I have ever known. I can envision her now sitting up front in order to hear better, eyes focused on the speaker, occasionally jotting down notes, and afterwards asking stimulating questions, engaging in discourse, always with respect for colleagues, always with a particular interest in the work of younger scholars whom she ceaselessly encouraged. The 2018 Joyce Symposium in Antwerp marked my last time with my friend Claire. I will always cherish my memories of those days. We spent many, many hours together then. As always, I enjoyed her quick wit and lilting laughter. As always, I rejoiced at her New York accent, stronger than my own. I want her to be remembered for all that we knew her as in terms of the Joycean world and the scholarly world, but also for the sheer spirit with which she engaged life. Claire was a gourmet cook, and I had hoped to visit her magnificent Kent, Ohio kitchen one day. She was a gifted, talented painter. Her watercolors were gentle yet deep. They're marvelous expressions of color. I had hoped to see many of them in person one day. It didn't work out that way. Perhaps most of all, I want Claire to be remembered for her Facebook statement when she retired from Kent State in 2019. She thanked all her students, from her student teaching days to her 2 years at St. Nicholas of Tolentine High School in the Bronx. She called those, quote, some of the best years of my life, end quote. To her years at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, through her 30 years at Kent State. She wrote to all of her students, quote, y'all have made me love my life, end quote. That is the sentiment that I hope we hold in our hearts now that Claire's remarkable journey westward is over. Adieu, ma chérie amie. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. That was delightful and heartfelt. Pat?
Vivian's mention of Claire's skills as a teacher reminded me of the student at Miami who switched her major to English because Claire was such a good composition teacher. I'd heard plenty of students who had taken composition and said, I never want to take another English class again. With Claire, it was the opposite. I'm going to give some background on how things come together in Miami in 1986 and following. At the MLA meeting in New York, 1984. Remember, this is December 1984. That's when MLA meetings were then. She sought out Sherry Benstock, largely because Sherry had co-authored with Bernie a book called Who's He When He's at Home, and it was about names in Joyce. So she told her that she wanted to go to a PhD program and write a dissertation on names in Joyce. Sherry went back and told Bernie about it. They sent letters to her. Why don't you come to Tulsa? And so she did. She enrolled in their PhD program in fall 1985. Meanwhile, just a few months later, the faculty of my department at Miami decided that we really needed a new chair, and the dean agreed. It was too late to get out to do MLA interviews, though. So we hadn't really publicized it yet, but I went to MLA that year, seeking out two people that I particularly wanted to apply. One was Zach Bowen and the other was Bernie Benstock. My idea was that at least I would have a good friend as chair and somebody I could talk to. And so they both applied. They ended up being the first and second choices of the department. And Zach was chosen as chair. He, of course, wanted a job for his own wife, Lindsay Tucker. That was easy enough. But when he found that from the dean that the department actually had lines that had not been filled by a previous chair, he said, well, we have enough money to hire Bernie and Sherry too. Why not? He came by my office. What do you think? I said, it's great, but the dean will never go for it. The dean went for it. I said, well, okay, but the department will never go for it. They did. All of a sudden, we had everything lined up except for one thing. They wanted to bring their favorite graduate student named Claire Culleton. I was going to be the new graduate director, and I asked to see a record. Okay, let's get her. And so she came to Miami after 1 year at Tulsa. That changed everything around here for a long time. And one by one, the people involved with that have disappeared, I'm afraid. But it was a kind of a golden age. And one of the major reasons it was a golden age was Claire. She took a seminar from me. I looked up, I'm a pack rat with these things. So I have notes on the papers that people wrote 40 years ago. This wasn't quite 40, but it was, she wrote a really good paper that I thought should have been published. It was on the good soldier. And she was amazing in class. She was one of the funniest people I have ever known. Absolutely one of the funniest. She would come in and complain about things, but her sense of humor would get the better of her, and she would start making jokes about her own complaints. I remember her coming in one time and saying, "Oh man, why don't you ever attract some cute guys to this program?" You know, nobody ever thought of it that way before, I think. She finished in 1989. Her, I forgot who the outside committee member was, but there were 4 department members, including Bernie as chair. And Sherry, Zach, and I were the others. I don't know how many people have had a dissertation committee consisting of 4 people who have all written books on the subject. So this is some of the background. She won a Best Teacher award here. She won a couple more at Kent State. It was just every review of her teaching was spectacular. After she left Miami, I would see her only at conferences, unfortunately. One of those was the Rome conference in 1998, where both my wife and my son were with me. It was their first trip to Europe. And one of the great things about going to Europe seems to have turned out to be meeting Claire, who was going around saying, what do you think about, what's the best Italian word? She said, I think it's spinaci. Isn't that a wonderful word? Spinaci, you know? And for years, my son would say, have you heard from Spinaci lately? It just became her name. He couldn't remember Claire Culleton, but he could remember spinach. She was just a delight to be around. In London, in 2016, she and I were part of a panel assembled by Marie Beja in memory of Sherry Benstock, who had died a year earlier. We were told that we could either do a paper that had some connection with Sherry's work, or we could or we could do a more personal thing. I didn't think I'd be very good at the personal things. So I wrote a paper that had a starting point with one of Sherry's. But Claire chose to do a personal talk about Sherry. It was really great. I mean, it was wonderful. How could she do this so well? Well, the other day I happened to find the thing she wrote a year earlier for the James Joyce literary supplement about Sherry. And all of the lines she used were there, or at least all of the ones I remembered. So she was reusing her material as I think Murray and Ellen did in theirs. But she points to Sherry's all of her good points about how she was such a wonderful mentor for especially for women, for her students, especially for the women. That's what Claire has been. I can't tell you how many graduate students of my own have talked about how she sought them out at conferences and encouraged them to do one thing or another. It was just wonderful. She also did one other thing for which I'm very grateful to her at the same conference. This time I did not, by the way, have my wife along. That's relevant. So I was having lunch with Claire, and she said, "Hey, you want to go shopping with me this afternoon?" I said, "Of course not." She said, "What are you taking Yolanda when you go home?" I said, "Of course I do." And okay, I made a U-turn on that one because I was being set up. If I hadn't gone shopping with her, I might not have gotten around to bringing a present home for my wife. And she wanted to make sure I didn't make that mistake. So I'm grateful to her. I wish we still had her.
Thanks, Pat. I think we all agree with you on that. And Ellen.
Thanks, Maria. I know this is a memorial panel, but I think it's best to honor Claire by discussing her origin story rather than her exodus. Claire Culleton's arrival to this world is a wonderful representation of her influence in academic criticism. Claire often told the story of her birth when she was proposing complex critical analyses that she wanted to curb with personal metaphors. She described the unusual way she was born to show that she was willing to offer comedic self-criticism as proof of her sincerity when she presented vulnerable and risky arguments, such as her suggestion that there's no paralysis in Dubliners, or that Irish art dominated the 1924 Olympics. She unpacked her careful readings with unflinching confidence and sometimes dangerous honesty, but always with humor. If you haven't heard the story of Claire's birth, it goes something like this. Claire was born a few minutes after her twin sister, while the doctor and her mother were waiting for the placenta to emerge. And for the record, if Claire's sisters are here today, hopefully they can help to correct the many mistakes that I'm sure I'm going to make with this story. And if any of you have heard this story before, because I know you have, Jim LeBlanc, I know you have, you helped me correct it. Okay. It was New Year's Eve, and her family, thinking that labor was over, awaited the release of the afterbirth. Instead, they got another baby. No one knew for a solid 9 months that Claire was even in the womb until she popped out, shockingly, to bring surprise and subtle genius into everyone's life from that moment forward. Claire was nothing but purely herself and magnificently genuine as both a person and a scholar. Her unpredictable, and in this historic moment, unfathomable birthday is perhaps the best metaphor for understanding Claire's life journey. Her insightful sense of compassion came from her ability to listen and digest without preconceptions. You may not have always realized she was there, but when her voice emerged, it did so with the kind of character, integrity, and belly-aching laughter that is simply unforgettable. Claire had strong opinions, and they weren't always popular, but they were absolutely respectable. She hated theory and jargon and the red light district in Amsterdam. She was a feminist who supported junior scholars, especially women, and used her success in the academic industry to lift up folks with brilliant ideas who might otherwise go unnoticed because they didn't have the pedigree or the cultivated personal history that tends to promise academic success. She simply didn't care about the bullshit. Instead, she wanted to hear and read arguments that shook up things, that flirted with impossibility, or that turned canonical dependency on its head. She didn't care if anyone judged her for it, and she loved you if you were willing to take a plunge or drive off a cliff with her as she rose time and again from the ashes of critical responses that resisted her alternative interpretations of historically acceptable readings of James Joyce. She lived her life authentically and without apology, behaviors from which we might all learn now that the pandemic has almost settled. Claire was one of the best drinking buddies around because she didn't question you if you wanted to order another cocktail or another bottle or just sit and discuss the gender politics of the institution over a glass or four of white wine. She was thrilled when she learned that she would one day be president of the International James Joyce Foundation. She truly loved the Joyce world and saw herself as an instrument of change and opportunity in the industry. She wanted to bring back the Women's Caucus and think about how we break down gatekeeping in academic publishing. When she decided to step down from her position as editor of the New Irish and Irish American series at Palgrave Macmillan, she made sure to hand her editorship to a female scholar who teaches at a state college, not an R1 university, hoping to pull others up wherever and however she could. She was an unbelievable mentor and friend, and she always had your back once she knew she could trust you. And that didn't mean that she lied to you. She was brutally honest about my chapter in Rethinking Joyce's Dubliners, telling me that she had heard enough about penises and ejaculation already, and I needed to turn the volume down on male sexuality. She was right, and my chapter is better for it, even with my few references to ejaculatory speech. I mean, who can resist when you're writing about Joyce? Two of Claire's loves outside of Joycean world were baking delicious pastries, cakes, and other delectables, and painting with watercolor. She held an annual champagne brunch at her home every spring with separate stations for each food category. She made everything from scratch, including items like lamb meatballs, chocolate croissants, and lemon meringue pie. Her current and past students, colleagues, and friends flocked by the dozens to enjoy her hospitality and her famous cooking. She was a gourmet chef as well as a profound intellectual thinker. Claire would photograph scenes from every trip she took abroad and recreate them in her painting group that met regularly. Some of her artwork even won awards, including a watercolor titled The Long Walk, Galway, that she painted after spending time researching the Olympics at NUI Galway on a Moore Institute visiting fellowship. Claire received an honorable mention for the painting in a juried show at the Fairmount Center for the Arts in Northeast Ohio in 2013. This is the painting, you guys. I know you can't see it well because we're zooming, but here it is. Her love of painting mirrored her love for Irish literature. She was interested in landscapes and images that might not stand out at first. The pictures and pages that you need to look at a few times before you realize their significant and influential place in our collective imagination. When I first met Claire in person, it was in the back room of an Irish pub in Miami, where she was meeting with old friends during a Joyce conference to mourn the debilitating illness of one of her longtime Joycean colleagues. I had asked for this meeting because I was shopping around a book idea, and Claire was willing to talk to me about it, even though it was premature, uninformed, and ultimately a terrible plan. She never said those things to me, though. And instead, she welcomed me into an intimate circle of nostalgia and love that day. I learned more from watching and listening to Joyceans celebrate the honor and legacy of one of their own, more than I would have from a formal interview with a different book editor who could compartmentalize life, separating work from personal experience. Claire lived and breathed her life as a scholar and a critic, but she did so without arrogance and without expectation. And she wanted to see that others could do the same thing, humanizing the academic life and never taking it for granted. When Claire threw what I thought was the first punch, but Igor has convinced me that it might have been the second. So when Claire threw the second punch at a long critical history of claiming paralysis as a central theme in Dubliners, arguing instead that we needed to change our focus to what was moving in a text that forecasted revolution and change, I was in the audience and I was stunned. It wasn't that I didn't buy the argument. Rather, it was that I had been wrapped up thinking about the impending centenary of the Easter Rising as I built an Irish Studies program for working class and first generation students at Bridgewater State, and her idea hit me deep in the gut. I understood it too well. I had my own epiphany that day when Claire said that Joyce's stories were actually about the inevitable eruption of an Irishness that could not be contained, like the bottle of Guinness on the mantle in Ivy Day in the committee room. In the many panels, conference talks, and drafts that followed, resulting in our co-edited collection of essays that tried to think about this role of movement and change in the stories, I learned that Claire's new reading of Dubliners was intimately connected to her pedagogy. She felt that readings we had been doing for years, that accepted paralysis as a defining feature of the text, while absolutely essential to the development of the scholarly discourse we have today, were overly influenced by our own whiteness and our partially uninformed understandings of how race impacted definitions of Irishness. And she learned to think this way by listening not only to her Joycean colleagues, like Vince Chang and Margot Norris, but to her students at Kent State, reading their papers and putting herself in their shoes as the contemporary world of critical race studies hit the ground running. To my knowledge, and tell me if I'm wrong, she never presented those ideas formally. Her essay in the collection was more about the general concept of things happening in Dubliners. But I know she had been contemplating a new project that might address what she saw as a connection between paralysis and racial discrimination of the Irish at the turn of the century. Her thoughts inspired me, and it took me a while to figure out how to write about it, but eventually I did. I have Claire to thank for the presentation that I will give on Wednesday and for the courage it takes to articulate new ideas when your idols are sitting in the audience listening. I want to conclude by stressing how much Claire loved all of you. Generationally, I'm late to the scene, where the exquisite and remarkable beauty of Claire's mind liked to wrestle with discourse and history while spending time with folks she saw as fundamental to her being. Joyce Studies was one of her homes, and it was dear to her heart. She respected the field so deeply that she shared it selflessly with others, particularly new voices seeking to participate in a community that brings great joy to all of us. When we welcome others into our fold, we honor Claire's legacy. Let's try to always remember that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. That was wonderful. So I'll wrap up with just a few words. I first heard mention of Claire Culleton when I was editing the JJLS at the University of Miami. And I was sitting in the JJLS offices, and Zach Bowen popped in the doorway and said, "Claire's coming to the conference this weekend. You're going to love her, kid." And as usual, Zach was right. And indeed I did. So Claire Culleton Yeah, absolutely. He could always call these sorts of things. Claire, her New York accent, her humor, her love of all modes modern and Joycean was a fixture in our world. It remains difficult to accept that she passed away, excuse me, without a farewell in this terrible pandemic year. A striking presence, she made a brilliant impression while lecturing at the Trieste Summer School, so much so that she had a standing invitation to lecture and celebrate Bloomsday in Zagreb, a city she came to love as much as her own beloved hometown, New York. At the 2004 Bloomsday Conference in Dublin, the Bloomsday Centenary Conference, she enraptured a packed auditorium with her tales of J. Edgar Hoover, walking into lower Manhattan FBI offices and promptly being escorted out of the lower Manhattan FBI offices, and then ordering personnel files through the Freedom of Information Act. While another scholar in the audience asked if he could FOIA her file, Claire laughed with absolute delight and said, of course, yes, absolutely. She loved the idea that the FBI was now tracking her. At the 2008 MLA in Manhattan, almost buried by a blizzard, the weary folks on her Joyce in Exiles panel and the attendees who had braved the snow were invited to commiserate at a local pub that evening. She held court with everyone from graduate students to established scholars, treated their ideas with equal regard and facilitated connections in their work and lives. Of course, as you guys all know by now, Miami figured as a central nexus in Claire's life. She not only finished her PhD at Miami, but returned to give talks and attend the Miami Joyce birthday conferences in February. Though her reputation preceded her, as Zach clearly pointed out to me, and it was a reputation for virtuosity and just a delightfully wicked, good fun. Ultimately, after I moved to New York, I ran into her at a conference on Ireland and race at NYU. And we hatched a plan in the back rows that weekend, listening to panels to become scholarly partners, examining Ireland's sort of peculiar entanglement with primitivism that resulted in our Irish modernism and the global primitive. And I'm delighted to see so many of the contributors to that volume on the call today. Since Claire's passing, so many people have shared their experiences from scholarly encouragement and outreach to genuine and lasting friendship. While Claire's bequests include the many scholars she mentored and the students she encouraged, what will surely also endure is her bright and vivid writing about literature and culture of the 20th century. Though she chose to devote herself to the notoriously obscure James Joyce, her own writing sings with clarity. She was an equalizer of narrative with no tolerance for pretense. And coming from working class New York, she had a zeal to make Joyce accessible without diminishing his complexity. Her 3 monographs, Names and Naming in Joyce, Working Class Culture, Women and Britain, 1914 to 1921, and of course, as people have noted already, Joyce and the G-Man, J. Edgar Hoover's Manipulation of Modernism, reflect her interest in lucidity and precision with language, at the same time examining intricate textual and cultural practices, particularly those in literary modernism that speak truth to power and reveal the voices of working class women. Claire's work reveals her determination to expand the scholarly conversation beyond its usual margins, and her consistent efforts to strike a path for women in literary studies and Joyce studies. Absolutely delighted beyond measure to be elected president of the International Joyce Foundation. She would have attended the Joyce Conference in Trieste this summer with utter joy, and perhaps ventured afterwards to see her fans in Croatia. If we had all been able to be together this year, it would have been delightful. At many conferences, she was a fixture at the early morning session. If she heard that a promising young scholar was giving a talk, she would invite her to a coffee and offer encouragement and feedback. And these young scholars would often eventually be encouraged to submit to one of her projects or as part of a long-standing series on new directions in Irish and Irish American literature that she edited for Palgrave for so many years. The series has no less than 27 titles and remains an impressive list in Irish studies. True to her belief in equality, the list includes contributions from emerging scholars to superstars in the field. And while Claire's absence will be a painful note at future conferences, so long as any of us who knew her remain, her own writing and editing, and her support of generations of scholars will endure. Amor scholaris, subjective and objective genitive. Thank you. So I believe we are at time, if not a minute over. So I will defer to the conference organizers if they would like to allow for maybe 10 minutes of responses from the audience. Okay, well, I think then we do have a few minutes since no one is telling us that we don't. So if anyone from the audience would like to share a word or response or a story, I think that would be lovely. If you can use the reactions on the bottom and raise your hand and I will call on you.
Maria, this is Kiki Culleton.
Oh my gosh, Kiki, go right ahead. We're
but
so
Carol-
happy you're here. You have no idea.
And Carol's on too.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I don't know how to raise my hands on this. I'm sorry.
Okay, go for it, go for it.
But I just wanted to say, wow, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us. John reached out also and sent something to Carol. And, you know, for all of you, Claire just adored every single thing. I mean, Carol and I came on the 2010 Joyce conference in Prague. And we just had a wonderful time with meeting all of you and people that we had heard about forever and ever. And it's impressive to hear because we didn't know that Claire. We knew the funny cooking, painting Claire. And so it's just a joy and a special thrill for our family. So thank you so much for everyone's kind words. And just thank you from the bottom of our heart.
Thank you, Kiki and Carol. And as Claire would say, right back at you. Yeah. So I'm just taking a look at the chat and everyone's thankful and appreciates all of the joy and warmth and moving stories. So if there's anyone else, I'll make a last call for anyone to say a word or two. No, okay. Well, then I suppose. Oh, Vivian, go right ahead.
I just want to mention one thing that I didn't mention because I, was concerned for time, and I made a note to myself that if there was time, I wanted to say it. Something that Claire said years ago at one of the conferences sticks with me. It's something that I wish I could do, but I never have. She said that she got advice from Zach to always start with clean text of Joyce, not to use your marked up text with all sorts of notes and arrows and everything. And she said at that conference that's what she did. You know, she always would start with a clean text, with a fresh book that didn't have any notes in it. I've never been able to do that. And it's another aspect of her that I looked upon with awe and admiration, to think of that as a pedagogical tool. So for those of you especially that are younger and still really building your entire oeuvre of work, I throw that out to you from Claire, that maybe it's a good idea when you're actually teaching the material to use a clean text. And it was an honor to be part of this. I was very honored to be asked, and I thank my fellow panelists for being able to share in this experience.
Thank you, Vivian. Would Pat, Ellen, or Igor like to have a final word, or?
I could say one thing about what Vivian just said, and that is that I don't think Zach ever went into a class with a clean text. It occurs to me either he's giving advice that he doesn't follow, Or maybe you're remembering Zach, but it was Bernie who said that. Because I think Bernie did use.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. Do you think it was Bernie and not Zach? Well, that's
I think
my
it was
memory.
probably Bernie.
It
because
probably was. I'm so sorry. But
Yeah,
it
Bernie
was,
told
but
me
you
one
do
time-
remember the advice. Okay,
Yeah,
correction.
Bernie told me one time he always used a text with no notes in it.
Yeah.
And he would take an index card with like 6 items on it to talk about into class, and that was it. But no, that.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good correction. So now we know. Yeah.
Okay. If we have just one more second, I'll say that when she was going on the job market, Claire asked, and she got a job interview. She said, "You have any advice?" And I said, "Just be yourself, but don't overdo it." She knew exactly what I meant. You can't just be, doing yourself with people you don't know yet, but don't hide it either. Make a compromise. I don't know whether she did that or not, but she was successful.
Absolutely, she was. She was.
Yeah.
Ellen, is that your hand up? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say one last thing. It's just, it's remarkable to me to have a panel like this right now. I know we're a Zoom world, and I really do wish that we were in Trieste. And just seeing all of you in your little boxes, and we're talking about Claire, it's just reminding me what is so incredibly important about Joyce studies. I mean, we have to not let this die, you guys. Like Claire was really devoted to like making sure that we mentored people properly and we brought them in, and that we created this kind of thing that we're doing right now, like this opportunity to celebrate each other. We have to stick with it. And I wanted to say, to Claire's sisters, I'm so glad to hear your voices, because as Tim just said, we're like feeling Claire through you. It's amazing. It's kind of like thinking about how often Claire talked about her family at conferences, and she talked about you guys all the time. It was so lovely to like feel like you're here with us. It's one of those amazing things that I feel like happens at Joyce conferences. Now, if we could all just, go to the bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lasting legacy that we need to live up to.
Well,
May I add something?
Of course, Igor, go ahead.
I would just like to thank everyone once again for inviting me to participate in this panel, but also I would like to express, the amazement by the fact that there were so many layers to Claire and so many outlets, and just truly so many ways of affecting people's lives. But ultimately, we all consolidated on her core values and qualities and characteristics, and that is truly what painted her a person that she was. This very, very open, honest, simple and approach person that truly affected our lives. And I cannot believe that that a person that I had been reading at one point as a university student eventually became a friend. I would like to say a lifelong friend, but someone who has obviously left a huge impact and mark on my life, on all of our lives. So it's an honor to have known her, honestly. So thank you. And I'm very grateful to have been a part of this panel and to have heard your stories, Claire.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you. It's nice to have met you, even if just on Zoom. And I think the other panelists feel the same way. And as I was thinking about what I would say today to introduce the panel, I thought, should I get into people's biographies and where you're at university? And I thought Claire would hate that kind of pretense. So I just used everyone's first name and said, take it away. In any event, I hope to see all of you at the next Joyce conference in Dublin. And if not before, if anyone comes to New York, drop me a line. Okay, and thanks again.
Maria, can I just thank you for this panel? As I said in the opening ceremony this morning, quoting Murray Beja, Claire was such a bright light in our world. And she's still a bright light in our world. Listening to what you've all had to say so beautifully about her tonight, it's been extremely moving to see so many sides of Claire, the scholar, but most of all, Claire, the wonderful human being that we all know. The obvious place to go now would be to the bar or to the pub or to the.
I was going to say that.
I think
I
we're
was
all
going to propose raising a glass of white wine.
after a session like this. So treat yourselves, all of you, to a drink in Claire's honor tonight. The rest of us have to keep working. We have another panel starting in about 1 minute on Joyce's letters. But just to all the panelists, thank you so much for this very special event, remembering Claire Culleton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And thanks to, Catherine, Laura, and Ronan, and all the organizers for making this possible. Thank you.